Before we get into the case today, I love doing Murderous, and I know a lot of you love listening to it. There's now a way for you to help keep the show going and help with production costs through a monthly donation. Just scroll to the bottom of the episode description and click the support link. I really appreciate it. If you will give me just a moment, because before we begin today's episode, I want to take that time to acknowledge a loss that has been devastating for so many, including myself. It is the reason why there was not a new recording of Murderous last week. I lost a very good friend. Her name was Taryn. Taryn wasn't just a listener of Murderess Podcast. She was one of my first supporters, one of those people who showed up early, stayed consistent, and believed in what I was building, even when I wasn't sure myself. She supported all of my creative endeavors. She was there for some of the most important moments of my life as well. My wedding, the taping of my first comedy special. Moments that feel even more meaningful now, knowing she was a part of them. She and another good friend of ours, Petra, came to the very first taping of Murderess Podcast with boxes and boxes of Pop-Tarts. I mean, so many boxes. Jamie ate Pop-Tarts for months. And if you've been rocking from the beginning with this pod, you already know why that matters. Taryn had a beautiful spirit, and I don't say that lightly. It was something you could feel from a distance. In the way she encouraged people, in the way she showed up, in the way she made you feel even without ever needing attention for herself. There was a time when I wasn't sure if I wanted to continue Murderous without a co-host. I didn't make a whole lot of announcements. I didn't explain. I just took time away from producing the show. She never pressured me. She never questioned me. She was just asking me one thing. Where's my podcast? And somehow that was enough. I hope her voice never fades from my memory. I hope the way she believed in people continues to echo, not just through this podcast, but through the many lives she touched. This episode is for her. Thank you for giving me a moment to say her name.
You hear good things.
March 1st, 2008, Emory, Texas. It was the kind of night that disappears into itself. No traffic, no street lights worth mentioning. Just a quiet rural road cutting through darkness. Just after midnight, a fire breaks out at a small brick home. When firefighters arrive, they expect what they usually find out here. An electrical issue. A space heater left on too long. An accident. But as the smoke clears, something doesn't add up. Inside the house, they find bodies. Not burned beyond recognition, but shot. A mother, 2 young boys, each killed execution style. In another room, the father is still alive, burned, bleeding, barely conscious. He can't stand, he can't see clearly, but he can speak. And as medics lean in, he whispers a name. Outside, down the road, police find a teenage girl. She isn't burned. She isn't injured. She's crying. Hard enough to be convincing. She keeps saying the same thing over and over. They shot my family. At first, it sounds like shock, like grief, like a survivor who arrived too late. But within hours, investigators realized something unsettling. She wasn't hiding from the killers. She had already let them in. I'm Sidney Smith, and this is Murderess Podcast. This week's Murderess is Erin Caffey, and the girl who opened the door. Now, here's a reminder that this is the story of a deeply religious family, a teenage girl desperate for freedom, and the moment obedience curdled into violence. This is not a story about monsters breaking into a home. It's about what happens when the danger is invited. Before there was a fire, before there were gunshots and headlines, there was a girl growing up in a house where order mattered. Erin Caffey was born in 1990 and raised in rural East Texas, a place where churches outnumber stoplights and families tend to live close to the values they were raised with. Her parents, Terry and Penny Caffey, were deeply religious, evangelical, devout in a way that shaped every corner of their household. Faith wasn't just something practiced on Sundays. It structured daily life. There were rules, clear ones, rules about modesty, about behavior, about who Erin could talk to and when. No unsupervised dating, no music that wasn't approved. Friends were watched carefully. Privacy was treated less like a right and more like a privilege, one that could be revoked at any time. Even Erin's bedroom reflected that mindset. The door was expected to stay open, always. In this house, openness wasn't about trust. It was about visibility. And Erin, by all accounts, was not a problem child in the way people sometimes expect. She was intelligent, emotional, thoughtful. She did well in school. She wasn't skipping class or sneaking out at night. She wasn't trying to burn the house down. She was trying to breathe. As Erin entered her teenage years, the tension in the home sharpened. Adolescence has a way of testing even the most stable families. And in households built around strict obedience, that pressure can feel magnified. Erin wanted autonomy, not chaos, not rebellion for rebellion's sake. Agency, that's what she wanted. Erin wanted to choose her own clothes, her own friends, her own future. But those desires collided head on with her parents' worldview, one where authority flowed downward and questioning it was seen as dangerous. Terry and Penny believed they were protecting their daughter, shaping her, saving her from a world they believed would corrupt her if given the chance. From their perspective, the rules weren't cruelty, they were care. From Erin's perspective, they were suffocation. Arguments became more frequent. The household grew tighter, not looser, as Erin pushed back. Privileges were restricted. Relationships were monitored. The more Erin tried to assert herself, the more control tightened around her. And it's important to say this plainly. This wasn't a house filled with physical abuse. It wasn't a home defined by chaos and addiction. It was something quieter, and in some ways, harder to name. A clash between authority and autonomy, between obedience and identity. In homes like this, conflict doesn't always explode outward. Sometimes it turns inward. Sometimes it simmers. Sometimes it searches for an escape that feels absolute. Because partial freedom doesn't feel like freedom at all. By the time Erin was 15, she wasn't just frustrated. She felt trapped. And when a teenager begins to believe that the only way out is through something irreversible, the danger doesn't always look dramatic at first. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like compliance. Sometimes it looks like waiting. Erin wasn't plotting violence yet. She was still doing what teenagers have always done. Pushing against rules, testing boundaries, imagining a different life somewhere else. But when control tightens instead of loosens, when agency, that thing she wanted so badly, is denied instead of negotiated, the question stops being if a rupture will happen and becomes who will shape it when it does. And Erin was about to meet someone who promised her exactly that. Every story like this has a moment where gravity shifts. For Erin Caffey, that moment had a name. Charlie Wilkinson. They met when Erin was still a teenager, young, emotionally raw, and desperate to be seen. Charlie was older, volatile, already drifting toward trouble with the law. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who believed rules were for other people. And to Erin, he didn't feel dangerous. He felt like relief. Charlie listened to her, not the way parents listen, with concern, correction, and boundaries, but the way someone listens when they want to be indispensable. He didn't challenge her frustration. He validated it, amplified it. When Erin talked about the rules at home, Charlie didn't say, they're trying to protect you. He said, they're controlling you. When Erin talked about feeling trapped, he didn't suggest patience or compromise. He said, they'll never let you live. Terry and Penny Caffey saw Charlie immediately for what they believed he was, a threat. The relationship was forbidden outright. Conversations framed as lifelines. In Charlie's words, Erin wasn't just a frustrated teenager. She was a victim, a prisoner in her own home, someone whose parents were actively standing between her and happiness. And Charlie positioned himself as the only one who truly understood her, the only one willing to fight for her. What Erin didn't recognize, or perhaps couldn't afford to, was how quickly Charlie's language shifted. What started as validation slid into something darker, less about freedom, more about erasure. He didn't talk about leaving. He talked about ending things. Not just the rules, not just the control, the people enforcing it. To Erin, this still sounded like escape, like permanence, like the kind of solution that would finally silence the pressure she had lived under for years. If her parents were gone, there would be no rules left to break, no door to keep open, no one watching. This, she began to believe, was the only way they could be together. But belief and reality were already drifting apart. Because while Erin framed the plan as a doorway, a chance at life, Charlie's rhetoric had crossed into annihilation. This wasn't about love. It was about getting even, about getting to freedom. And not even as much about that as it was about removal. And the most dangerous influence isn't always someone who forces your hand. Sometimes it's someone who convinces you that you've already made the choice yourself. And once Erin accepted that framing, once she believed the only way forward required removing the people in her way, the story stopped being about influence and started being about planning. By the time Erin's thinking shifted from escape to solution, the language around her changed. She stopped talking about wanting to leave. She started talking about how. In private conversations with Charlie Wilkinson, even Erin began to map her own home, not as a place of safety, but as a structure with vulnerabilities. She told him which doors were usually locked, which ones weren't. She explained the layout of the house the way someone explains directions to a friend. Turn here. Avoid that. Don't make noise on this step. She told him where the guns were kept. She told him which nights her parents stayed up late and which nights they didn't. Which routines never changed. Which rules were so rigid they became predictable. This wasn't fantasy. It wasn't rage talking in circles. It was logistics. At some point, Erin stopped speaking like a daughter in conflict and started speaking like someone already standing on the other side of a decision. She wasn't asking if this could happen. She was helping determine when. Charlie listened and escalated. What had begun as grievance hardened into strategy. Charlie didn't talk about running away anymore. He talked about removing these obstacles, about how finality was the only guarantee of freedom. And instead of pushing back, Erin absorbed that logic and repeated it back to him. Together, they expanded the plan. He brought in others, young men who didn't belong to Erin's life, but who would soon be inside her home. Names that would later surface in court documents and interrogations. People willing to do what Erin could not, and who believed they were doing it for her. Erin gave them information, not emotion. She told them when the house would be quiet, told them where to stand. She did not tell them to stop. Now, what makes this moment difficult to sit with is not that Erin was angry or manipulated or young, all of which may be true. It's that she was precise. She didn't just express despair. She translated it into steps. Investigators would later note that nothing about the plan suggested any type of panic. There was no sudden break, no impulsive spiral. What unfolded instead was a slow alignment, desire, permission, opportunity, all locking into place. She wasn't imagining a different life anymore. Erin was scheduling one. The night was chosen. The roles were assigned. And those doors were left unlocked on purpose. And once that decision was made, once the plan existed outside of Erin's head, there was no version of this story where everyone inside that house woke up the next morning. March 1st, 2008. Late night settles over Emory, Texas, the way it always does. Quietly, without announcement. The kind of rural darkness where houses sit far apart and no one expects help to come quickly if something goes wrong. Earlier that evening, the Caffey family had prayed together. There was nothing to suggest this night would end differently from the ones before it. At some point after midnight, Erin Caffey left the house. She didn't sneak out in a panic. She didn't run. She walked away with purpose, knowing exactly what would happen once she was gone. Not long after, the men arrived. They entered through doors Erin had made sure were unlocked. Inside the house, her mother, Penny Caffey, and her two younger sons were asleep. They never had a chance to defend themselves. They were shot execution style, the kind of violence that is fast, efficient, and devastating in its finality. Terry Caffey, her father, was shot multiple times, but he did not die. Instead, he was left bleeding, burned, and barely conscious as the men set the house on fire. A final attempt to erase what they had done and anyone who might survive it. Flames climbed the walls. Smoke filled the rooms. The house that had held bedtime routines, scripture readings, and family dinners became a furnace. Nearby, Erin waited. When emergency crews arrived, she was already there, uninjured, shaken, crying, performing exactly the role she knew would be expected of her. She told the men had broken in. She said they shot her family. She said she didn't know why. For a moment, it worked. But inside the burning house, something happened that would unravel everything Erin believed she had controlled. Her father was still alive. Terry was severely burned, shot multiple times, in and out of consciousness. But when he was finally able to speak, he did not name strangers. He told investigators the truth. He identified the people responsible. And in doing so, he ensured that this story would not end in smoke and ash, but in a courtroom with Erin at its center. The investigation moved quickly. Once Terry identified the truth, once the story of random intruders collapsed, the remaining pieces fell into place with startling speed. The men involved were arrested, statements were taken, evidence aligned. And Erin Caffey confessed. Not immediately, and not without qualification, but clearly enough for prosecutors to understand the scope of what they were dealing with. This wasn't a girl who had panicked after the fact. This was someone who had helped build the crime from the inside. In court, the prosecution did not frame Erin as a follower. They framed her as the architect. They laid out the planning. how the doors were left unlocked, the timing, the information she provided. They argue that while others pulled the triggers, Erin had created the conditions that made the murders possible. Without her, the house would not have been breached. Without her, the family would still be alive. The defense offered a different story. They emphasized Erin's age, 17 at the time of the crime, her emotional immaturity, the strictness of the household, the influence of Charlie and the men who carried out the violence. They argued that Erin was desperate, manipulated, and psychologically overwhelmed. A teenager who made an irreversible decision before she fully understood its consequences. Both sides agreed on one thing. This was not an accident. The jury ultimately sided with the prosecution. Erin Caffey was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But the most unsettling moment in the aftermath did not come from the verdict. It came from Terry Caffey, the man who lost his wife, the man who lost his 2 young sons, the man who survived being shot and burned inside his own home. Terry did not call for vengeance. Instead, he publicly forgave Erin. He spoke about faith, about mercy, about refusing to let hatred finish what violence had started. He asked the court and the public not to define Erin solely by the worst thing she had ever done. His forgiveness did not undo the crime. It did not lessen the sentence. But it complicated the story in a way no legal argument ever could. Because in a case built on betrayal, premeditation, and irreversible loss, the final image is not one of rage, but of grace offered where none was required. In the years after Erin Caffey's conviction, the case did not fade quietly into the archives. Legal standards shifted. Juvenile sentencing laws changed. Courts across the country began re-examining what life without parole meant when applied to teenagers. Eventually, Erin's sentence was reduced. She would not be released immediately, but the door had once been welded shut was no longer sealed forever. For some, that development felt like mercy catching up with the law. For others, it felt like a second erasure. Another moment where the weight of what happened inside that house was being quietly lightened. And hovering over all of it was Terry's forgiveness. People still struggle to understand it. Some see it as the purest expression of faith, a man refusing to let violence define the rest of his life. Others see it as unbearable, even unfair, to the memory of Penny and those boys. But forgiveness, as he offered it, was never about absolution. It didn't rewrite the facts. It didn't undo the planning. It didn't resurrect the dead. It simply answered one question: what he would carry forward. Still, the larger question lingers. Was Erin manipulated by older, volatile men who framed violence as an escape? Was she exercising agency, making deliberate choices, knowing the consequences? Or was it both? This case is often described with language borrowed from romance, a Romeo and Juliet narrative of forbidden love and desperate youth. but the framing collapses under scrutiny. This wasn't love. Love doesn't require execution-style killings. Love doesn't begin with unlocked doors and end in fire. What happened here was choice, shaped by fear, resentment, influence, and belief. But choice all the same. And choice carries weight. Because some doors, once opened, never truly close again. They remain as absence, as silence, as foundations burned so completely that nothing solid is left to rebuild on. You've been listening to a production of Sidney Smith Creative, LLC, and the You Hear Good Things Podcast Network. All rights reserved. This episode is based on court records, police files, and contemporary reporting. Any reconstructed moments are grounded in verified evidence and are never used to change the facts of the case. For more true crime stories that stay with you, follow Murderess Podcast on your favorite platform and join the quiet jury community on our Creative Plus for early access, bonus content, and deeper cuts. Go to Sidney Smith Creative, CRE8TIV.com, and click the Creative Plus tab. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious.